Tony did make about Planned Parenthood and their services, we actually have someone here who's kind of an expert in this, and that's David Daleiden. And I was wondering if he could respond to the services that Planned Parenthood provides and doesn't provide other than abortion.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the most important things for people to keep in mind, and this is data that you can find from Planned Parenthood's own annual reports and service summaries that they've released over the past several years, and it stays pretty consistent year to year. If you just compare the massive number of abortions that Planned Parenthood does every single year, compared to proportionately the theoretical number of pregnancies that they are allegedly preventing by their other reproductive health services, the abortions at Planned Parenthood vastly outnumber the number of unwanted pregnancies that they prevent. So I'll summarize that again for everybody who's listening. Planned Parenthood does way more abortions by a number of 100 to 200,000 every year. They do far more abortions than they prevent every year by their contraceptive services.
Now, David, for years they said only 3%.
1 second, John. I just want to bring a bit of balance just to get somebody for someone who's pro-choice. So, Catherine, go ahead. You got your hand up.
Sure. My view is very similar to something that All Source has named previously, which is, I believe to just give the government the choice. I mean, I understand the point of view of people who are pro-life. I think it's a difficult decision to make. And there is two entities concerned here. There is a baby and there is the mother of the child, right? And I do acknowledge both. However, I think this idea of like forcing someone to give birth, I don't agree with it, because essentially you are forcing somebody through, there's a lot of medical changes that happen to one's body. There is psychological changes that happen. And so that decision, which is a very, very difficult decision, I do ultimately don't believe that decision should be at the hands of a government entity. I think should be up to the mother. But I think what happens often in these conversations too is that we have these two extreme sides. So we have one extreme side that's sort of pushing, let's have abortions anytime, unlimited, as many as you want, easy, like it's nothing, it's a clump of cells. And then on the other hand, let's not have zero abortions, you can't have any choice, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas most people, I think as a society, ultimately we have to have some sort of compromise. And I think most people will agree at a time period, which is about, let's say 12 weeks, whatever is reasonable for knowing that you are indeed pregnant and having sufficient time to make a choice, and perhaps even limiting the number of times, that you can have an abortion. I think that those are reasonable things, and most people who are pro-choice will agree with that because they don't think it's reasonable to just use that as a birth control method. And I think the other thing that, I think is important is like, how do you help women make that choice if you support women, going through with the pregnancy, whether that's adoption or keeping the child? How do you make it easier, or preventing, right? So sex education, having free, we don't even do the bare minimum, right? You have to pay for condoms, you have to pay for preventatives, UTIs, birth control, all of that costs a lot of money. So all of those things, why not make that free? Why not support, even to Millie's point, helping support women who do want to make that decision to keep the child, providing healthcare, providing babysitting services, women who have to work. Like, how do you create an atmosphere where women feel more comfortable making those choices to keep the child if they want to? I think those are much better directives that don't take away the choice from these women, but in fact make it a better choice to keep the child should they, be in a situation where they feel like maybe they can't, but they would like to, right? So that's where I go, and I think we need to find compromises as opposed to having such radical things where, either you don't value the life of a child, like the baby at all, or you just don't value the choice of the mother at all.
Catherine, you mentioned 12 weeks, and on the panel we've had a wide range of number of weeks. I think most were saying 20, 22, some were saying 6, some were saying 15. I mean,
20 is a bit high. 12 is fine. I mean, it's Europe. It's funny because, like, when I say funny, I don't mean it's funny as in haha, right? But most states in America that are banning abortions is between what 6 weeks is probably the lowest that I know of. That's Florida, and most states are like 18 weeks. And when when conservatives were like, hey, let's do 12 weeks, I think that's fair, right? Because the baby's not developed, there's no brain, nothing. There's all this fucking insane pushback from the left. They're like, "Oh no, this is you're taking away women's rights."
Well, we have to stop
And then you have
listening to
European
extreme
women saying the
voices.
same thing, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, your own country's banned it at 12 weeks. What are you talking about? This, like, you're overreacting, and it's like, okay. So
Well, that's the thing, Ian. You have to stop listening to extreme voices on either
they're not
end. This is
extreme.
where we
They're
are with a
mainstream.
lot.
They're mainstream voices. They're mainstream voices. You have the entirety of
Well,
the Swedish parliament.
but they're
Parliament.
not.
Now,
But they're
now,
not.
keep in mind, Sweden bans it, I think, at 11 weeks, right? And when when the Supreme Court came in and they were like, hey, we will leave it up to the states. These fucking Swedish women were like, oh my God, they're taking away women's rights in America. It's like, do you even know the issues? Are you even
Yeah, but
aware
Ian,
that your
most of
country
the
is
people.
like worse?
Most of the people that I know are pro-choice, right? But if you talk to them and you say, hey, well, how do you feel about the timing, right?
Yeah.
Most of them are going to come to a consensus on, say, I think 12 weeks will, 10 weeks might be pushing it, just because I think where it is, you can make maybe an argument for 10 weeks, but most people are going to go for 12 weeks because it's just enough time to definitely know. You want to give enough time for the person to consider the decisions and also know that they have pregnancy, because
Catherine,
sometimes you don't.
but can you
Yeah.
see, like,
What do you
you're the
know
first
that you're
person,
pregnant, though,
one second.
right?
You're the first person on the panel to say 12 weeks. Before you came, most were saying viability, which is like 20 weeks. So can you see how there's no concrete position when it comes to the number of weeks? And
I'll give you the morally acceptable number, Sulaiman. The only morally acceptable number is 0 weeks.
Yeah. That was the second point I was going to make to Catherine. So
Total
that's
ban
my
on
question to
abortion.
you.
I mean, like this idea that we kill some people and then we let some other people live. I mean, why are we doing that? Like,
Yeah. I mean,
this is
my only contention to what Catherine was saying was just in terms of language, because using it as a sense extreme, I don't think it's extreme. I think it's a logical position. You may not agree with it, but there's actually logic behind it. But
yeah, my position is very logical. It's based on
Catherine,
morality,
in terms of just going back to
it is a natural law, life versus unlife.
So so I understand both positions, but then so this is the question for Catherine, that when it comes to abortion, like you said 12, but then a lot of people in the panel said 20, some said 15, some said so now when you say majority, I don't know where that majorities come from. So
Well, I don't know about the people in the panel. It's from people that there's a lot of people that I've surveyed on this number. The reason that this number specifically, and again, that could be 10 or 12, but the number specifically only comes from the fact that that's enough time to know whether one is pregnant, and just a little bit of time to figure out whether that's, just a little bit time to reflect on it. That's all.
And yet the extreme values are the ones that always win out. Look at Gavin Newsom. Look at Kathy Hochul. They set it at maximum, right? You can even have a post-birth abortion in New York City, right? I mean, that is literally murder. So the baby's born prematurely, and they're like, yeah, we're just gonna kill it anyway because the mom doesn't want it to be alive. I mean, this is the reality that we're dealing with.
I'm somebody who's pro-life, but I'm going to kind of push back on you a little bit on this, because obviously I do think that there should be exceptions in the event of the woman's life being in severe
Absolutely. And these exceptions are in this bill, right? So I mean, I think that obviously there are these concerns, and every single, even Tate Reeves, who's extremely conservative, would say, yeah, okay, there are exceptions that we can make, medical exceptions, for example. And that's a pretty
good example. The other thing, though, is that, okay, if you do it starting at like 0, right? Yeah. A large amount of pregnancies actually fail in miscarriage in the early weeks, right?
Yeah.
So the only thing that I don't want to see happen, right? What I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see law enforcement all of a sudden like investigating women. Did she have a miscarriage, or did she go and secretly get an abortion? Those are the only things that I worry about. I wouldn't want to see women who have had miscarriages being targeted as, you're under investigation for having a miscarriage.
So I just want to bring Samantha in, and you actually jumped in, so that's good. Samantha, I mean, I know you want to add something, but actually go ahead, add something, and then I'll ask you a question. Go ahead.
I'll be real quick, because I've heard that argument before, and I think that is a fair argument to make, because that's a scary idea. We obviously don't want miscarried women who are mourning to be investigated, but if you really think about like if we did ban abortion and then someone had a miscarriage, we would basically treat it the same way as if, you know, if a born child died from an accident or cancer or something uncontrollable, the only reason we would ever investigate is if there was actual reason to, like if there was some extra thing that happened, you know, the parents came in and there was some kind of evidence that there's foul play, whatever that might be, and it would be the same with miscarriage. Like we wouldn't go looking for it, but if there's additional evidence that needs to be reviewed, I think it would be treated that way.
Would an accusation be enough? Because, you know, somebody heard that this person is not interested in having a kid.
I think it depends on the accusation, just like with born children. So if, you know, if someone goes to a police station with a born child and says, you know, this child died, here's the accusation, I'm their neighbor, this happened, I think, you know, you take it the same way you would do with a born child, and it depends on what the accusation is and if there's any evidence to back it up. But if there's no evidence, because it's
I could imagine how
then
that
it won't
could
go anywhere.
so wrong in so many ways, and you know, anybody.
I mean, accusations are
Be
bad.
like a witch
right?
trial all
People
over
make
again.
false accusations all the time. Doesn't mean that we get
And
rid
then
of the,
I would have
the
to
law.
prove, Ian, I would have to prove that I miscarried at 6
No.
weeks.
That's not how the law
That's
doesn't
ridiculous.
work. Where you have to prove it. It's if there's an accusation brought against you, then they would have to prove that you did something. So obviously, if you didn't do anything, there's no proof. So
Yeah,
it's not.
It's like if
But
someone
you know what's
accused me
more-
of murder
the
and
last-
I'm not
you
responsible for
guys-
it, they still have to investigate, right?
Sorry, guys, this is the first time I can be with like at least 5 people are talking at once. I want to give it to Ian. Ian, you're the chaos bringer. That's why. But I let you off.
But I think what's more concerning that I think is important to note here is actually that people might use that, right, as a way to get rid of their children. And that actually concerns me even more because that could be a way out.
Why? Why does that concern you even more? You're killing, what, millions of babies every single year in America through abortions? Many of them are not, you know, 3 months or something, you know. No, they're like fucking 8 months old and they're getting killed. So, no.
Because that's a danger to both the child
obviously
and the
some
mother.
people are still going to do it. Obviously, some people are still going to commit abortions because that's what bad people do, right? But that doesn't mean that, I mean, it doesn't mean that this is going to be the majority of cases. The majority of cases, you'll just simply have less death. You'll have less dead babies.
And people are going to have, well, what
Look
about
at
the
it from a
situation
utilitarian
when
point of
somebody
view, right?
keeps,
Would you-
what
would you-
about Ian, hold on,
Would you
what
rather
if you have
2
the,
million dead babies? Would you rather have 2 million dead babies or 10,000 dead babies? Okay, 10,000 is still unacceptable, but
okay,
that's
I
a
get
smaller
I get your point of view, but what if there is a baby? Okay, sorry, you've now got all these parents too who might keep the children and treat them, but they hate them, they resent them because they've now been forced.
At least I know a lot of
At
people
least
who are
they're-
abused as kids. I know a lot of people who are abused as children. I know a lot of people who are abused as babies, as infants. And you know, they have the scars and the wounds to prove it. But they're alive now. And they're happy that they're alive. Maybe some of them have like mental issues that they have to deal with. But you know what? They're alive. They can deal with it. This idea
And some of them
that,
commit
oh my God,
suicide and miserable.
in order to preserve them from being abused, we need to kill them. That is
Some of them buy guns
unfathomable.
and shoot
That is
kids
evil.
in schools.
Come on.
Some of them have such mental issues that they go and kill kids in schools.
Yeah, but you have to really think about that argument.
1 second, guys.
Saying-
Money
I just want to
absurd.
go to Manios.
Are we like, are we pushing for eugenics here? I mean, like,
Ian, wait a second.
that's
Ian,
eugenics.
bro, 1 second,
Yeah.
1 second. So Manios, I mean, you made a big statement. I mean, is there any data to suggest that basically children who weren't aborted and should have been aborted then carry out school shootings?
Hi, my name is Manushka, actually, and
Manushka, sorry, it's Manushka.
Yeah, I get it. It's not fully.
The reason I said Manios is because that's the first 5 letters on
Yes, exactly. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. And I love seeing so many women up here being able to speak on this topic. I made that statement just based on Ian mentioning about, you know, well, at least they're alive, and if they have to deal with some mental issues. And one of the biggest arguments here in the country is that a lot of the people who are involved in these mass shootings, you know, they have mental issues. We don't know what their upbringing was like, you know, and their parents had a choice to not bring them into the world because they couldn't provide for them, or whatever the millions of reasons that is none of our fucking business why anybody would have an abortion, you know, that does play a factor.
No, it doesn't. You don't have a crystal ball. You can't
And
determine
you
who's
don't
going to be
either.
a mass
You
murderer.
don't either.
But people are raised
don't-
perfectly. They're raised in perfect families, and they still become terrible people. So what? So what? How do we gauge this? How do we decide who lives and who
It
dies?
says not,
Who
it's
are we
not,
to play
but
God?
it's not for us to gauge. It's up to the woman and whatever her situation is.
Oh my God, you're not God.
And
you're
you're
not
not
God.
either.
You can't.
Yeah, exactly. None
You
of
can't
us
be
are, so
making a
let them
decision
fucking
to
decide.
take someone's life because you
You're
think
not,
they'll grow up
but
badly.
Ian, you're not either. It is left to the person. There are a myriad of reasons.
Left to the person?
There are
No, a
myriad-
baby, a
Why
child
are
is his
you
own
yelling
person.
at
Ian,
me?
you're forcing someone to go through a very difficult process of giving birth. It's not just
Is
like
it really that
forcing me
difficult
not to
of
be able to
process?
see
All
it.
our parents did it.
Yes.
All our parents did it. Every single
horrifying.
woman in our lineage did it. They gave birth to our,
You have
our
a
parents
vagina,
and grandparents
Ian.
and
What do
so
you
on.
there's
know what it's like to
postpartum
be a woman?
depression. It changes your body. You can die. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many
Not
Catherine,
if
things.
it happens, so don't have
Ian,
babies. You know, if you don't want to have a baby, don't have a baby.
Well, and
Tell
I'll
him-
say this real quick.
That's
the
what they're
reason,
trying not to
Catherine,
do, Ian, which
the
is why
reason
I'm
why
saying
the argument
abortion.
that you're well,
And then
you're
women
saying-
being
you're saying
raped have to
you're
be
for-
forced to have a baby too,
Yeah.
based on what you just said. If you don't want to have a baby, don't have a baby. Well, if I was raped and was pregnant,
Have the
no,
baby
no, I
anyway.
wouldn't.
Have the
You're
baby
gonna
anyway.
take care of it, Ian?
I'm sorry. You shouldn't
are
be taking people's lives like that.
And I just
So-
want to point out real quick because I heard Catherine make this argument and I heard somebody make this argument a while back where you say, you know, you're forcing the woman to give birth. But first of all, just one point is abortion doesn't avoid birth. The child still comes out. So the child's still born. But second of all, if you are the type of person who doesn't support abortion up to birth, then so are you. Like if your cutoff is viability or 12 weeks, like you were saying, then you're also forcing a woman to give birth and to change her body and to list, you know, all those other things you listed. But
Those
you're
are not the same changes. You're kind of, that's false equivalency.
That's conflating. That's not the same.
how is that not the same? Because if you say the cutoff is 12 weeks, then she's going through the same thing she's going through. And then if we say the cutoff is 6 weeks,
At 12
That's
it's-
not the same
at
thing.
12
Your body does not change.
Catherine, for every woman that you can find who says that, you know, they're glad they had an abortion, you'll find another woman who says she
This
regrets
isn't
having an abortion
You're
at
so-
all.
And vice
Okay.
versa.
Well, but that
You can
doesn't
give anecdotal
matter. It's not. It's
examples
just
of
a
that.
choice.
The beautiful thing about that is that they have a choice, though, Ian. And you're talking about playing God. Should we also ban?
You are playing God. You are
Okay.
playing God. You're taking a life and you're just
But
throwing it
so are
away, and
you.
you don't.
But so are
it's
you, though.
disgusting. It's despicable that the fact that you are just willing to throw away a life to say that it has no value because it's inconveniencing.
But you're doing that to the
It's
mothers that you're
inconveniencing
forcing.
you.
understand
Excuse
that?
me.
It's not an
Okay, guys, let me-
inconvenience.
let me-
Then why have
frame
an
this-
abortion?
Ian,
Because
Ian,
all
one
the
second, one
reasons
second.
you provided.
Right, but let me just frame this discussion a bit. I didn't press the mute. I rarely use it. So somehow.
Okay, yeah, accidentally, right?
Yeah, no, I didn't know.
I
But I just wanna-
complete
Ian.
my sentence real quick, super quick. I just want to say, you know, the arguments that you're posing, right? Apart from the medical reasons, okay, like a woman needs to have the abortion, otherwise she'll die. That's a legitimate reason, right? But apart from that, every single reason that I've heard on this stage and everywhere else is that it's an inconvenience. Oh, she experienced, she's poor, she can't raise the kid. Oh, she was a victim of abuse, therefore the child will also be abused. Like, you have these million different reasons, but it all comes down to it being an inconvenience. The baby's an inconvenience.
That is
so you wanna
such a
get rid of it.
straw man.
No, it's not straw man. It's what I've heard. It's what you guys are saying.
I
on
have
stage.
not
It's
heard
despicable.
anyone.
Yeah.
You need
One
your
second,
hearing
one
checked.
second, guys.
You need to get your hearing
All right,
checked.
sorry guys, I have to use my power now, so apologies for using the mute button. All right, so Manushka, I wanna ask you a question, right? And I wanna frame what Ian said. So basically,
Wait, may I be able to answer it without him railroading and I'm able
Of
to
course,
complete
of
my
course,
thank
of course.
you. I'd appreciate that.
That's fucking comedy.
Yeah, of course. So Manushka, the way the argument is coming across.
My power went out, so.
Is that you got
Had to mute y'all motherfuckers, man.
Worried about the giving birth, a woman giving birth, and maybe the pain they go through with that. Then we're worried about the pain that a woman may go through if they continue carrying on the child. And then we're talking about the pain that a woman may go through if they were, for example, raped and they had to carry on having a child. And I guess Ian's argument is that, okay, pain is bad. It's the worst thing ever. Like, all of these things you describe are so horrendous. But you know what's worse than that? It's murder. So what would be your response to that?
Well, again, there's a myriad of reasons why a woman would need to have an abortion, whether it is something that affects her health, whether it's something that affects the raising of the other children that she does have, whether it's financial reasons. Again, this is between her and her doctor. That's it. most doctors, well, I think there's the one here who considers it murder, but most don't. And this is something that should have never been weaponized or politicized. I understand everybody has their own reasons behind it. A lot of it is, grounded in religion or, just morality leanings. But at the end of the day, I am pro-life, me personally. I've always put myself in positions where I didn't get pregnant. I am in control of my body and my autonomy. But for other women, for other people, it's none of my freaking business. So I believe in pro-choice in that. I do not consider it murder, no, because I don't know the reasonings 100% behind it. And
I probably know the reasonings. We've
again,
seen the
you're
polls. What are you talking about?
interrupting me.
Less than 1% has to do with rape. The rest of it is
So I
inconvenience.
wasn't I supposed to, wasn't I able to speak without?
Ian, sorry. Ian, let Manushka finish and I'll let you come back.
I mean, I understand you're passionate about this, Ian, but you also don't have a vagina. So really don't.
Okay, but I'm passionate about life.
I mean,
life matters.
yes.
I'm a human being. I'm alive. I'm cognizant, and so are these babies.
And so are the women,
man.
including me, that you're speaking down and against because it just doesn't fall in line with what you
Because you're
believe.
endorsing murder.
No, but you're endorsing violence, hate.
And this isn't violent? Killing a baby isn't violent? Excuse
Right,
me?
1 second.
Really?
Right, 1 second. Ian, you make your point, and then let Manushka make her point, because what's happening is you're both not able to make a point, and people are feeling like there's just an argument rather than a deep discussion. So Ian, you make your point, and then just let Manushka make her point, and both of you don't interrupt each other. Go for it, Ian.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this idea that this is not violence, really. I'm floored by the claim that this is not violence. What you call aborting a baby, oh, it's killing a baby. You're killing life. What is potentially a human being, a full-blooded adult human being? I've known many people who have experienced violence as children. I've known some people who were almost aborted by their moms. But their moms, for whatever reason, decided not to go through with it, followed their heart, raised their child in the best circumstances they could, and they're grateful for it. They're alive. They're adults now. They're wonderful human beings. And if their moms were like, oh yeah, I'm just going to kill a baby, well, that's one fewer person, 5 fewer people, 10 fewer people, 100,000 fewer people that I would know because their parents decided to abort them. No, this idea that we can simply dismiss a human life as being nothing but a clump of cells, that it's not violent to get rid of it, it's abysmal. I just don't have the words for it. Like, you see me stuttering here. I don't usually stutter, but it's appalling to me that anyone would defend this. Sorry.
So I'm going to bring Manushka, and then after that, I want to rotate the panel a bit. So I'm going to go to Dr. Miller. So before I go to you, Manushka, just anyone who's got any, I know people are passionate about this issue, and this is probably the first space we've done on it. So any questions you have, put it in the comments. I will read through them, and then I'll start posing it to the panel. So any questions, put them in the comments, and we'll do that. There's also a newsletter, which I will be pinning on the top as well. But Manushka, please go ahead, and please just let her finish her point. Go for it, Manushka.
Oh no, I think I've made my point. What I was able to say.
Let me go for Dara.
I wasn't speaking to debate at all.
All right, no problem. Dara, you go ahead. And just for balance, you go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad that Ian was quiet enough that anyone else could speak. I have to imagine that anybody here who is, so adamantly against abortion in any situation is also voting for welfare and social services to be up, and for universal health care and universal child care to be able to accommodate all those babies that are being born. Is that correct? Is that what's happening here? I just want to make sure everyone wants to
Oh yeah.
clap for
I don't
that,
live in
or
America.
what? Yeah.
I don't live in America. I live in Malaysia, and they do provide these services. And abortion is banned here. So yeah.
Again, I mean, I think you've spoken up.
Ian, let Dara.
No, you made a point. You made a point, and you tried to paint me as a hypocrite. And I don't appreciate that, because the reality is that I do support.
Why does he get to just speak over everybody?
Guys. Ian, I think it's just important. Let Dara finish her point, and then if you want to respond, we'll give you the chance to respond right after. Just because every time I jump in, it's just constant interruptions, and the audience is getting a bit frustrated. I know it's a very sensitive topic.
Yeah, they like murder, and I don't like murder. So
Ian, I know. Ian, you just did it again, bro. Please, man. Dara, go ahead.
Oh my god, I have 4 kids, and this is like, holy crap, dude. But like, I'm not talking to you, Ian, so if you feel slighted right now, that's on you. That's on you, man. There's like a ton of people in here. Anyway, I just feel like we have to, outside of medical issues, I think one really big factor that I haven't heard people, I mean, I think some of the women, I don't know if it was Catherine or Samantha who had touched on it, but we have to remember the mental horizon, and that this is a really, this is a form of control. This is a last-ditch effort of control for a lot of abusers, and we really can't overlook that. That is, I mean, statistically, that is a thing, and so then that puts you in this conundrum here. If you're a pro-life person, where it's like, well, you're pro-life for that child, but what about the mother whose life might be in danger, and that baby who's born into abuse? Where, I mean, the content I post on, by the way, I don't expect people to know who I am or follow me, but I post about child abuse most days, and a lot of the times I'm seeing cases where the children get killed, or the babies get killed because the mothers were, got pregnant by their abusers, and the abuse didn't stop when that baby was born. And I think that's something that needs to be contemplated more in these discussions.
When you're finished, can I speak to that? Take your time, though. I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, and Dara, Samantha, can I ask you a question as you answered Dara?
Baby would have stopped
Hold
the
on,
abuse, Dara?
we'll give you,
Baby would have stopped the abuse.
All right, Dara, do you want to answer that question before we go to Samantha? And while you answer that, it just seems.
I couldn't hear, and I don't want to.
Okay, I'll let him ask the question again, but just quickly, it seems that the debate in Sliman, like this is a topic I don't know much about, so you hear me speak very little, but it just seems, and based on what I was hearing for the last half an hour, is that the debate is whether abortion is considered murder. And, you look at the statistics, it varies. So in the EU, Denmark, 90% believe it's not murder, more even. In Poland, less than 50% believe it's not murder. And in the EU, it's about 70%. So it's the question, I think the main topic here is abortion considered murder? And maybe, Dara, I'll let you answer Ian.
Mario, what's fascinating is that in Europe, hold on. What's fascinating about Europe is that the stage at which you can terminate a pregnancy before it becomes illegal is a lot lower than most states in the United States, which is interesting, right? I mean, despite the fact that the majority of people there, right, especially in places like Denmark and Sweden and so on, and Britain, believe that it's not murder to commit an abortion, they still set it at a very low stage, right? Like it's like 12 weeks, 11 weeks in some places. I think France is probably one of the highest ones at about 16 to 20 weeks or something. And even then, it's still a lot.
Yeah, Denmark
than
is
what
12 weeks.
Right, yeah, 12 weeks, and that's all what conservatives are asking for. But whereas in a place like New York or California, it's set to like indefinite. You can have an abortion a day before the baby is
That is not true. That is not
true. So Dara, hold on, guys, hold on. So Dara, I'll let you, because Ian also asked you a question earlier, so I'll let you speak, and then I know Samantha wanted to jump in right after.
Yeah,
go ahead, Dara.
I think she answered. I don't think she heard my question. The question was.
Yeah, ask it again.
Yeah, do you think the abuse would have stopped in these cases where both the mother and the child are killed by their abuser? Do you think the abuse would have stopped if the mom had an abortion but stayed with the man?
I think it stayed with the man. I can't.
Yeah, which is usually the case.
That is
so Dara, feel free to answer, then we'll go to Samantha right after. Go ahead, Dara.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear? Okay. Yeah, that's a whole that has a slew of variables, which I don't think that I'm in any position or anyone is to answer that question. Do I think? I think that's a case by case basis. You can't. How many times? What is it? An average of 7 times a woman, something like it's like 7 tries of leaving and getting out of the abusive relationships before they succeed. It's something like that. The success rate is low in the first few tries, and so I can't say. I mean, that question's so
okay. So it is pretty high, right? So regardless of whether they would have had an abortion or not, regardless of whether they would have had an abortion, they would still suffer the same fate.
No, dude.
So let's get Ian.
You just said you didn't know. You could speak on it, and now you're making an affirmative statement claiming to know.
All right, Ian. Let's go to Samantha. Ian, please.
Hold on. I'm so sorry. Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead, Dara.
I'm not claiming to know. What I don't appreciate is you putting words in my mouth. I'm saying no to you. I am telling you no for saying that I said something that I didn't. Okay, there's a difference. I'm not saying no to.
Okay, so you don't know anything. You admit. So you're just making statements, declarative statements that you do not even understand.
Ian, Dara,
Ian.
Guys, we need guys. It's honestly, we have a lot of hands up. It's important to just get others to speak. Again.
I just want to. Can I?
Yeah, I'll let you wrap it up, Dara. Please do, and then we'll go to Samantha.
Yeah, I would like to because I feel bad for Samantha and she asked so nicely. Yeah. So I just want to say I don't know because of all of the variables, and you don't know what stage in this relationship the woman might be. I do not know. That is very clear. Okay, I just want to make sure that everyone understands. I don't fucking know. It depends on every situation, but what I do know is that it is stringent.
Okay, that's from Kern. Go ahead, Dara.
It is cringe as hell when a man's ego is so fragile that they have to try to put words in your mouth, like we all just witnessed right now from Ian.
What is the fragile ego you're talking about?
Ian, let's not
You're
go.
making assertions
Ian, let me go to Samantha, please. All right, Samantha, mic is yours.
That's ridiculous.
Samantha, mic is yours. Go ahead.
No. I think what Dara brings up is actually really important. And the stat that you brought up where it takes women on average 7 times to leave an abusive relationship, that's correct. I actually knew that because I read that in a magazine at a women's shelter when I was in elementary school because my father was actually abusive. So we ended up in a women's shelter. So it's very close to my heart, this question in children. To be fair, I do come from a very pro-life perspective, so I don't think we agree on solutions, but I would say the pro-life view on this is that the child involved is also a victim of that abuse, and their life is still worth protecting, and just like a born child. So, obviously, there's born children in abusive situations. We would never even consider the idea of eliminating them or killing them to get the woman out of that situation so she wouldn't be tied to that man for the rest of her life. So it should just be the same with unborn children. They're still alive, they're still human, still worth protecting. So we should be protecting both of them and finding solutions to get them both out of that situation. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you respond. But it's just the idea that abused kids, your life would be better if you weren't here. You're saying that to me, not to get emotional. But it's that was a case that I grew up in, but I still am worth protecting and valuable as any other human. And I think that I was worth protecting even before birth. That's all.
Thank you for that, Samantha. I just want to bring Dr. Miller in because I've been trying to bring him for a while. Dr. Miller, Mario gave some stats about Europe and their position when it comes to abortion, but does the individual or does people's position matter? And what I mean by that is we know people are easily influenced. In the United States, we know when it comes to the pro-life lobby, pro-choice lobby, they basically spent 30 times more than the pro-life lobby, so they're obviously going to impact people because essentially in the US, how elections are decided is whoever spends the most money wins the election. So what's your thoughts on that and anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of money in promoting abortion, and this has been for the last 100 years because it's been a tool of eugenics, population control, and all the rest of things, and only recently really began to be an issue of women's rights. When you look at the earliest feminists, so many of them were against abortion because they realized that women were victims of abortion as well. I want to say that I do really appreciate the sincere articulation from some of the pro-choice people here of some serious things that we need to think more about. I don't think pregnancy and childbirth are in any way trivial. I think they're serious ordeals that if we're, effectively saying that you have to go through with the completion of that, I don't think we can just say that lightly, especially if I'm a man that won't go through that. But at the same time, I grew up in a country that was 5% pro-life. I grew up pro-choice, and we heard earlier so much about abortion being healthcare, etc., etc. I changed my position when I was at medical school in Oxford. I saw what abortion involved, that this was a human being, that it did end the life. And I also saw the impact that it had on women. I saw the evidence that a woman who has an abortion has significantly worse mental health outcomes afterwards, even when you adjust for all the factors, the confounding factors and pre-existing factors. It was bad for a woman's mental health. I saw women who were harmed by it in so many different ways. I saw women who would be victims of abuse, and abortion would just be used as a way of covering up that abuse. It would be forced on her by the abuser. We sometimes forget that about 25% of abortions are not the woman's choice. They are forced on a woman by someone else. So my position is that we don't have to see this as a debate between the baby and the mother, where the pro-choicers, side with the mother, the pro-lifers side with the baby. I really believe that we have to go with both, that we have to protect the baby completely in every situation, except when the mother's life is at risk. That's more complex. But at the same time, we have to provide for mothers. And I think we do that better than we're often portrayed. There are 3,000 pregnancy resource centers across the US. What the Democrats do is actually try and get them shut down and turns a blind eye to when they're being firebombed and, having terrorist attacks on them. So I think the pro-life movement is trying more than we're portrayed to. But of course, there's still plenty more that we can do, and I really hope that we can continue to do that, because I think we can all have common ground that the woman should be supported. I believe that the baby should be supported as well at the same time.
Kara, you got your hand up. I want to bring you in because you've not had a chance to make any comments. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I wanted to, I don't think anyone has brought this up with regards to the United States and, how it differs with regards to, let's say, Europe, because Ian was talking about, the abortion rates, whatnot in Europe. The United States is not very good about the education factor of how to prevent pregnancy. Okay, this is not something we don't prioritize. So when we look at the pro-life movement, there's not a lot of education that happens, or just a lot of emphasis on how much resources we can put into the education, so we don't have as many unwanted pregnancies. Okay, that's something that the United States, even though over the past 30 years, the rate of abortion has come down quite a bit. It has come down a lot. And I think there's a common misconception to think that just because someone is pro-life, that just because someone is pro-choice, that means that we're pro-abortion. We're like, yeah, kill the babies. That's not it. That's not it. We want the same thing for the most part that people that pro-life want. We want women to live their best lives and to have their best health care, right? But what we look at it as a situation, say, let's put money into universal health care, which most of Europe has. So I don't think we can compare apples to apples when we're talking about abortion rates or the attitude towards abortion, when the United States has a very, very strong Christo-fascist, we're super conservative on sexual education. There's just bills in Florida right now. They don't even want to talk about periods to girls younger than 6th grade. I got my period when I was 10 years old. So if we don't even want to have a conversation with children about sexual education, then it can't be either or. And that's the thing that I don't see the pro-life movement talking about. We're not evil baby killers, y'all. We just want the best.
So I'd like to.
One second, guys. I just want to go to one second. Just one thing you said, Christo-fascist. I don't think that's an appropriate term. I mean, people from monotheistic religions or Christianity have certain values and certain traditions that they want to follow. I wouldn't call them fascists. I think that's not the right term.
I think.
Dr. Callum, go ahead. Yeah.
I agree with Sulaiman.
Right, but okay. So here's the thing. I am a Christian. So when I refer to Christo-fascist, I'm just talking about the rash of laws that are being placed on us here. It's a movement. It's not all Christians. Just so you know. That's not what I mean.
So I think we can look at the evidence on this. I mean, we spoke a little bit about this earlier. There are 2 Cochrane reviews. Cochrane databases, by the way, are the main sort of authoritative systematic reviews on interventions and how effective they are. There are 2 of these on sex education and the impact on unintended pregnancy rates and abortion rates, and they both find that sex education doesn't work. It's intuitive that it works, but when you look at the content of it, it promotes sex just as much as it prevents pregnancy from sex. These balance each other out, and in general, the best systematic reviews consistently show that sex education doesn't reduce unintended pregnancies, it doesn't reduce abortions. Sorry, go on.
I'm sorry. So I'm going to challenge that, because when the United States made a consistent effort, when I just stated that the abortion rates have went down, that was in conjunction with sex education being pushed throughout. And there's plenty of studies that show that in the areas where sex education is standard, there's actually lower abortion rates. So if you could drop those studies.
Yeah, and Callum, actually, I do want to
be
answer
great.
this. I do really want to answer because I've been spending, since our last conversation, going through every single study you referenced, right? And the problem when we're having, so first of all, the first reference, which I don't want to butcher the name. I don't want to butcher the name. Guttmacher, right? Guttmacher, went through every single study you cited. Number one, the one that you're referencing about 58%, I think that's the one you're referencing about late-term abortion, or the quote-unquote late-term abortion, because there's a lot of pushback on that, right? And so first of all, the first important thing to highlight is less than 1% of all abortions that happen in the United States happen after 21 weeks, right? And then that study cited that 58% of the people who got abortions after 21 weeks said they wanted to have abortion earlier, but they couldn't get abortion earlier because of lack of access. The vast majority, and then the problem with that study, though, here's the problem, is that it cites from 2004. Second, the sample pool of the people, because there's other studies that panels here was referring, and I think David, you tagged me on this post about fetal abnormalities, right? And you said from 2.5 to 30%. That's not how the study said. It said from 2.5 in 1980 of late-term abortions were due to fatal abnormalities and went up to 30% in 2012. So it increased to 30% because of ability to detect this earlier. Went up to 30%, not from 2.5 to 30. It went up to, and a lot of those cited actually very severe medical conditions was huge reasons why for it, right? Either the risk of the baby or the mother, right? And they go down in a lot of medical, and I'm not a doctor, right? But I think the problem when we're having these conversations about when we say studies is one, from the research I did, the sample pool is very small. A lot of the data is very hard to obtain, or if it's outdated. Or three, the problem is, and even the people that do these studies acknowledge it, is it's very hard to get accurate data because a lot of women that they ask these questions about to try to get the data, they don't want to talk about it, right? They avoid this conversation. And maybe, Dr. Young, you're probably 100% right because of the mental trauma that, and I'm not disputing that. But to utilize some specific sources and science-specific as this complete overarching argument to suggest that there's not healthcare policies in place, sex education in place that might reduce abortion, fine. But at least what we do know that it reduces, and I think it does, is it goes back to this conversation about pro-choice and pro-life, is infant mortality rate. Right? If you're so adamant, and people say, oh, I know our movement doesn't do a good job. Great. This Twitter space can say that all you want. Let's look at the political leadership in this country. Let's look at Republicans. Because it goes back to this idea. If you're pro-life, why aren't pro-life, these guys that are advocating so much about banning abortion since conception, why aren't they putting so much effort into Republican Congress and Republican leadership to advocate for policies that would increase medical care to pregnant women, increase economic stability, healthcare, and invest more in our healthcare to ensure that people that want to have children make sure they at least survive? Because the problem with this conversation is the moment the baby is born, you're on your own, and that's the fact. Look at the debate we're having. We're talking about conception. If you do an abortion at conception, it's murder. Okay, that has dominated this debate more than anything else, and I just don't see pro-life movements advocating severely enough more to actually put policies in place to try to find the solution to provide women the option and care that they desire if they
Yeah,
have to
that's
make a
true.
Sure. Well, so I think
we went through this before. There are many states, including Florida. We just talked about Florida's bill. That's what we're talking about. $25 million is
nothing.
Pregnancy
That's
centers.
nothing.
And
Sorry, that's nothing.
Yeah, maybe also instead of spending money on being pro-choice, pro-abortion, why didn't you send that money to help build, supports for these women? You wanna help out, you wanna save kids' lives, right?
If I could just be heard for a second.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Medicaid has been extended a full year. So I did want to drop back. There's been so many things that have been said that need to address. Earlier we were talking about miscarriages and prosecution of women. Sounds like a legitimate concern, but every single abortion law creates penalties, not for the mother, but creates penalties for the doctors. So there's going to be no snooping around in all this. And actually, prior to Roe versus Wade, there was no law that prosecuted women. Matter of fact, you can go back to the English common law, and while abortions were illegal, there was never a time in the American Western tradition of law that we prosecuted women. So this whole discussion about, oh, somehow women are going to be, snooped upon or something, it's just a brand new situation. and I don't think it's a real one. I
But
do
you
think
prosecuted the people performing the abortions, right?
correct, exactly. Now, I do think I would join Dr. Miller. I think some of our pro-choice people on this call have made some good contributions. Catherine, for instance, has made some very significant and meaningful things regarding providing real options. And I think that's the heart of most pro-life advocates. We want to see women presented with real options. When you talk to Planned Parenthood, you're not getting real options, right? They're not talking about adoption. They're not talking about parenting your baby and really looking at that. They're looking to the money to get the procedure, and that's it. And so I think that that's a big issue.
I just want to bring in Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller, I know you wanted to respond to also, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think there was so much in there. It's difficult to know what to exactly pick out. I do want to defend my use of some of these studies because, of course, they're significant. Firstly, this point has been labored and labored that Republicans don't do enough, pro-lifers don't do enough. We've mentioned many times about the private space work that they do with 3,000 pregnancy centers, with the lobbying that is already going on with the post-Roe future statement, encouraging Republicans to invest significantly more in all of this. Ultimately, we don't answer for the Republican Party. We're not in charge. We wish we were, but we're not. We're not even close. Pretty much every pro-lifer on this call, I think, supports all of these things and better support. The problem is the claims that you make just simply aren't backed up by the evidence. When you look at the late-term abortions, for example, as I said, these are not because of medical emergencies. Let's take the UK data because the UK actually keeps good data, whereas America doesn't. In the UK, after 20 weeks, there are 3,000 abortions every year. You can call it 1%, you can say it's a tiny proportion, all you like. It's 3,000 babies after 20 weeks every single year in the UK. It's probably 5 times that number in the US. Now, we know, not because these are women reporting, unreliably, like you suggest, the doctors' forms that they fill out when they perform an abortion, explaining why they do an abortion, say that the majority of these are not for medical emergencies, they are not because the baby has a disability, they are for socioeconomic reasons, done under the mental health clause. That is an absolutely cast iron scientific fact. Likewise, on the mortality stuff, for infant mortality, you said earlier that you basically made up some reasons about why there is very high infant mortality in pro-life countries. The real reason is because when you have a pro-life law, more babies are born with serious disabilities, and they are much more likely to pass away. And so to say that abortion is a solution to infant mortality because you're killing these disabled children before they're born doesn't make sense. That's like saying you're solving adult mortality by killing everyone when they turn age 18.
No.
It's just not.
Look at the United States. Look at the United States.
Aspect of infant mortalities in the United States, by the way. Like that, here we have, it is a huge racial issue in the U.S.
But that's not again. You're okay.
The vast majority of abortions in the United States are black.
Yeah, that's what I read. That actually.
So let me go back to Dr. Collins' point.
Abortion doctors are the biggest killers of the black people.
Dr. Collins, the lack of access to medical care in the United States, especially for the economic disadvantaged in this country, is a huge reason why we suffer enormous amount of infant mortality rates, right? I mean, we're not going to have an argument that somehow the United States has if the United States had a robust healthcare system with easy access where everybody can go and have proper medical treatment, it is clear that it would drop infant mortality rate. It is not because of the argument. No, Jesus, man, I literally, every single source that he mentioned, I looked through. First of all, the arguments, specifically the Gallagher, are not as definitive as he said. Now, he's citing the UK, and the UK has a great example, and they use the mental health clause. It still does not reduce the fact that it's less than 1% when we're having a conversation about abortion, right? And so, now,
but
do you want to have an argument
it's not
about
just
banning
1%,
late-term
it's
abortion?
3,000 abortions. Let's just be clear about the numbers.
Then the UK can pass a law. That's the UK. I'm not a UK citizen. The UK can pass a law of banning late-term abortions. That's fine. That's up to the UK. Not my country, not my call. I'm talking about the United States. That's why this.
It's not your call unless it's Ukraine and Russia, right? That's your call, right?
Please, dude, stop.
No, for real. Like you seem to be very invested in the lives of Ukrainians, but when it comes to babies, suddenly you're like, it's not my problem.
Okay. Are you done? Thank you.
Wait, can I just ask a real quick question for all source? So are you saying the solution to infant mortality is just killing them before they're born?
No,
Like,
that's literally not what I'm saying.
I'm
That's
sorry.
exactly the opposite of my argument.
I know, I'm sorry. That's why I'm asking you
No,
to
it's because it's twisting. I'm sorry. It's just because I'm very proponent of expanding as much as possible healthcare access into the United States. As much as possible.
No, I'm sorry.
I want.
I didn't want to misrepresent you. I
Yes.
understand what you're saying. It just threw me because we were talking about like abortion, so I was trying to figure out how abortion.
No, because the
infant mortality rate.
because what Dr. Callum is suggesting is that the reason why the United States has higher levels of infant mortality is because of our prevention of late-term abortion, because of medical late-term abortion because of defects of infants, right?
No, that's not what I was saying. I can clarify when you're done.
Please clarify, please.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that's the only reason. I'm saying that in general, when countries or states have higher infant mortality rates when they ban abortion, the main reason for those discrepancies explaining the general trend is because of the impact on disability selective or eugenic abortion. But I absolutely agree that the United States healthcare system is appalling. When you look at the maternal mortality rates as well, when you look at the ethnic disparities between maternal mortality rates between African American and Caucasian women, it is appalling. And that is clearly not just because, it's not just down to one factor. But when you look on a general trend across the world, the abortion law isn't the fundamental problem. Malta and Poland have the lowest maternal mortality rates in the world. They are certainly not anywhere near the most affluent European countries, but Malta has had no maternal deaths from any cause in the last 12 years.
No,
I agree the US is not good enough. I agree that the US is not good enough, but I'm saying the US needs to do both improving its maternal health care, improving its perinatal health care, reducing the disparities between the different ethnic groups, because that clearly has a significant cause that needs to be understood better, and at the same time, protect the children, thousands of whom are being killed after 20 weeks every single year in the US.
Again, I've made this, so that's going to end, because the problem is Roe v. Wade, the overturning Roe v. Wade is very recent. That data from since Roe v. Wade especially, has consistently shown U.S. infant, and that was my other point, and maternal mortality rate is specifically in states that have, the reason why they're very pro-life law, or that they claim to be pro-life, is because they underinvest in healthcare, specifically maternal healthcare. Historically, in the last 20, 30, 40 years, you can look, those states have higher levels of infant and maternal mortality rate, which directly correlates with the lack of access and the lack of investments in those facilities, right? And so that was my argument. But again, I don't, as somebody in this conversation, and I know I'm a man, so that's why I believe very sincerely that we can have a conversation about late-term abortions. I can understand people want to say they want to ban it. I get it. But in the end of the day, when we're talking about a total ban of abortion, I'm sorry, I am not going to dictate in any way, shape, or form how a woman, the decision that is so personal to her, that is, as everybody here says, even you, Dr. Kam, that can cause emotional trauma and whatever. And the last thing I want is for anybody here but that person and their intimate loved ones and their family and their community, if she so desires, to make that decision for her or ban her from making any sort of decision, to the point that we're even having conversations about banning the pills. Like, that's ridiculous, and that's just not feasible in this conversation.
So I think it helps to... Yeah, so let's, I guess, think back to this question we had earlier, where some people were saying, let's ban it after 12 weeks and so on. I've debated with abortion providers in the UK who say similar stuff, let's ban it after 17 weeks or whatever. Now, what all of these people are fundamentally saying is that at some point in the pregnancy, the woman should not be allowed to choose. They won't phrase it like that, but that is what they're saying. Anyone who says that abortion should be banned at any point or for any reason, anyone who puts any restrictions on abortion is fundamentally implicitly saying, even if not explicitly, they're implicitly saying that in some situations, women should not have that choice. They don't want to admit they're saying that, but they are. And all of us on this call so far have said that implicitly. The pro-life perspective doesn't say anything different in principle. It's not, suddenly this crazy attitude of controlling women or denying women choice. It's just the extension of that principle to every human being. because we believe in human equality. So I
You said human
used to be
equality.
pro-choice. If I can finish very quickly.
Let him
I won't be long.
finish.
I won't be
I
long.
don't think
Guys,
it's
let him finish.
politicized and weaponized as much in England as
Manushka, just let him finish and then I'll complete.
You should let him finish. Come on.
Oh, fuck off.
So I won't be long. All that to say, look, I used to be pro-choice. I grew up 5% pro-choice country. I very much was of this opinion. I don't think pro-choice people necessarily want to kill babies. I think there's a small minority that do, but most people don't. I think most people engage in good faith.
Fucking Google it.
No, one second, Ian. Let him finish. Go ahead, Dr. Miller.
I think most people engage in good faith, but I think at the same time, extending that good faith means that we have to make a sincere attempt to understand the pro-life perspective, which is not suddenly this crazy desire to control women or to deprive them of choice. Everyone who supports any limit on abortion thinks that women should be deprived of some choices. That's not because they're misogynistic, it's because they recognize that at some point there is a human being that needs protection. Pro-lifers just set that point at the biological consensus, which is fertilization.
Manushka,
So,
let me
real
go
quick,
Ian, let me go to Manushka, then I'll go to you. Let me go to Manushka, then I'll go to you.
Okay.
Manushka.
Oh, apologies. I was just writing Dr. Callan because I was not my intention to interrupt you at all. I found what you said be very, very profound and interesting. And I just wish that it was more like that here than it is in England. I feel like what you said, it just doesn't come across that way here at all. I did not mean to like interrupt just to interrupt or like any of that shit. I just really loved what you said. But that's not our experience here.
I appreciate that. I won't take up the conversation, but thank you for that, Manushka.
Real quick, guys. Yeah. If I may, I've been trying to get in, but I just
go ahead,
conversation.
Go ahead, Trash.
All right, cool. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and say it, and because I have personal experience with this, as a man, right? The most important person in a pregnancy or the birthing of a child or caring of a child is the woman. We know this, right? The woman's going to be carrying it for 9 months. She's going to be giving birth. The mother is obviously going to be taking care of that baby, including feeding it. And so that is the most important person in this conversation. 100%. I'll never disagree with that. But I have been waiting for anyone to make the argument about, number one, I'm tired of men being relegated out of this conversation completely. Again, I prefaced it with the woman's the most important part. But
Hey, Mom, what's up?
Hey, what's wrong with your car?
It's basically fucked.
Why? I saw you posted something on Twitter. I just was looking at Twitter.
Yeah, so, like, the brakes are done in the front and the rear, and then, like, the front tires need replaced again. So, like, all in, it's, like, about